Aaliyah was a girl who lived in a small town, and from the very beginning, she was different from most of the children around her. She had been blind since birth, and though the world was dark to her eyes, she had learned to see it in her own unique way. She recognized people by the sound of their footsteps, the rhythm of their breathing, and the tone of their voices. The scent of fresh-cut grass told her she was near the school field, and the feel of the wind brushing her cheeks helped her find her way home. In many ways, she noticed things that others overlooked. Yet to her classmates, all they saw was a girl who could not see Dot every morning. Aaliyah walked through the school gates with her cane tapping gently against the ground. She kept her head held high, but inside she always carried a little nervousness. The school hallways were full of voices and noise, and sometimes people would bump into her without bothering to apologize. She knew some did it on purpose, whispering cruel comments as they passed. Yet she tried to ignore them, telling herself that she was stronger than their words. Aaliyah loved learning. She paid close attention in class, listened carefully to every word the teacher said, and often knew the answers when no one else did. But because she was quiet and different, most of her classmates never really spoke to her. They sat in their groups, laughing and chatting about things she could only listen to from a distance. It wasn't that she didn't want friends, she longed for someone to sit beside her at lunch, to share stories with, to laugh with, but people rarely gave her the chance. Sometimes, in the middle of a busy class, she would feel the sting of small, cruel jokes. A pencil would be placed just out of her reach, or someone would shuffle her books around so she had to fumble for them. A giggle or two would follow, and Aaliyah would pretend not to notice. She told herself that reacting would only make things worse. She had learned the hard way that silence was often her best shield, even though deep down it hurt to be treated as if she were a joke. Still, Aaliyah never let herself lose hope. She found comfort in little things. The feel of sunlight on her face during recess, the sound of birds singing near the classroom windows, and the kindness of the few teachers who always encouraged her. She held on to her dreams of being strong and independent, even if others could not see the strength inside her. At home, her mother often told her, "Aaliyah, you are special, not because you cannot see, but because you see the world differently. Don't let anyone make you feel less than what you are." Those words gave her courage, but when she walked into school, courage was not always enough to stop the whispers or the laughter. Aaliyah kept her routine simple. She would sit in the back corner of the classroom, neatly arrange her books in order, and quietly follow along with her lessons. At lunch, she would sit by herself at the far end of the cafeteria, carefully eating her food while the noisy chatter of students filled the room. Sometimes she could feel the stares of others, as if they were waiting for her to trip or spill something, just so they could laugh again. She hated that feeling, being watched like she was entertainment. Yet, Aaliyah Kosha never gave them the satisfaction of seeing her break down. She carried herself with dignity, even though it was not easy. When someone pushed her, she stood up straight. When someone laughed at her, she calmly ignored it. What no one realized was that behind her calm silence, there was a fire slowly building, a strength that she had been training for years to control. But for now, she kept that part of her hidden. There were times when she wanted to scream at the world, to tell them she was not weak, not helpless, and not someone to be pitied. But instead, she stayed quiet, saving her energy for something greater. In her heart, she believed that one day, people would see her not as the blind girl, but as Aaliyah, the girl who could do anything if she set her mind to it. Even in her loneliness, she had a deep patience. She listened to the world around her in a way that others never could. She could tell when someone was nervous just by the shake in their voice, or when someone was lying by the hesitation in their words. These small abilities gave her confidence that she was more capable than people believed. Still, at school she remained the quiet student, the one no one truly understood. And so, day after day, Aaliyah carried on. She walked the halls with Her cane sat silently in her classes and endured the whispers and jokes of the bullies. They thought she was weak, fragile, and defenseless. They thought she would always remain quiet. But they were wrong. Deep inside her was a strength none of them had ever seen. What no one knew, not her classmates, not the teachers, not even the cruel bullies, was that Alia's silence was not weakness. It was control. And soon they would all learn just how powerful the quiet student truly was. Every morning, when Alia stepped into the school hallway, she braced herself for what the day might bring. The building was always alive with noise, lockers slamming shut, sneakers squeaking against the floor, and students chattering about weekend plans or the latest gossip. For most kids, it was just another busy school day. For Alia, though, every step was a challenge because the sounds that others ignored were the only map she had. With her cane tapping softly in front of her, she counted the steps, remembered the turns, and recognized voices to know who was nearby. But even with all her focus and courage, she could never completely avoid the cruelty of her classmates. It was subtle at times, like the quiet laughter when she accidentally brushed against a desk, or the whispers when she walked past. Other times, it was bold and deliberate. A foot would stretch out in front of her path, trying to trip her. Books would be snatched from her hands and passed around, making her stand helpless for a few moments before someone tossed them back. To the bullies, it was entertainment. To Alia, it was another reminder that she lived in a world where people only saw her blindness, not her determination. Still, Alia kept her composure. She rarely let her anger show, though inside she often felt like crying. Her heart ached whenever she heard the laughter echoing behind her, but she refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing her break down. "Stay strong," she whispered. To herself, "They don't know who you really are." Classes were no easier. Alia loved learning. She had an incredible memory and could recall facts and details with ease. But whenever she answered a question correctly, some students would roll their eyes or mutter, "Teacher's pet." Once, during a group activity, a girl sighed loudly and said, "Why do we have to be with her? She can't even see what we're doing." Alia had smiled politely, pretending the words didn't hurt, but deep down, she felt the sting. The cafeteria was the hardest place of all. Lunch should have been a time to relax, to laugh with friends, to share stories. For Alia, it was a battlefield of noise where she had to carefully count her steps and find her way to an empty table. She always chose a quiet corner, far from the loud groups. As she unwrapped her lunch, she could feel the eyes of others watching her. Sometimes, kids would swap her drink with something else, or whisper cruel things just loud enough for her to hear. Once, someone even placed an empty chair in her way so she would stumble into it. The sound of laughter that followed still echoed in her memory, and yet, through it all, Alia endured. She ate her lunch quietly, never responding to the taunts, never crying where they could see. She told herself over and over that she was more than their jokes, more than their cruelty. She knew she had strength inside her, a strength they could not begin to imagine. At home, she let out the emotions she hid all day. She would sit on her bed, feeling the weight of loneliness pressing on her chest. "Why can't they see me for who I am?" she sometimes whispered to herself. But then, she remembered the lessons from her sensei. Patience, control, power comes from within. Those words gave her comfort, reminding her that she was not as powerless as the bullies believed. The truth was, Alia's blindness had given her something special: sharper hearing, quicker reflexes, and the ability to sense things others missed. She could hear the faintest shuffle of shoes behind her, or the hesitation in someone's voice before they spoke. While others relied on sight, she relied on awareness. And though her classmates saw her as weak, she was silently training herself to be stronger than all of them combined. One particular day stood out in her memory. She was walking down the hallway when a boy called out mockingly, "Hey, Aaliyah, can you even tell what color your shoes are?" A chorus of laughter followed. Aaliyah paused, tilted her head, and calmly replied, "No, but I can tell who laughs the loudest when they're insecure." The hallway grew quiet, and though she kept walking, a small smile spread across her face. For a moment, she had shown them a glimpse of her inner fire. But the bullies didn't stop. They never did. Every day brought new challenges, new taunts, and new tricks meant to break her spirit. And every day, Aaliyah faced them with quiet strength. Though she felt the pain deeply, she also knew something. They didn't. She was not just surviving, she was preparing. Every insult, every cruel prank, every humiliating moment was shaping her into someone stronger, someone unshakable. Her struggles were not only about enduring cruelty. They were about learning patience, discipline, and resilience. She understood something most of her classmates didn't, that life would always bring obstacles, but what mattered was how you faced them. And Aaliyah faced them with quiet dignity. Even as her heart longed for the day she could finally show the world who she truly was. The daily struggles at school continued like a storm. But deep inside, Aaliyah was steady, like a mountain. Bullies thought they were winning, but what they didn't know was that every cruel laugh was only feeding her determination. Every push, every insult, every whisper of doubt was only sharpening the fire inside her, and though no one realized it yet, the quiet, blind girl they humiliated every day was far more powerful than they could ever imagine. The day was coming when the truth would be revealed, and the daily struggles that once seemed endless would transform into the very reason she would rise. Asterisk, it was a Friday afternoon. It's a kind of day when students were restless, waiting for the last bell so they could rush home for the weekend. The cafeteria was louder than usual, buzzing with chatter, laughter, and the clatter of trays. Aaliyah stepped inside slowly, guided by the sound of her cane tapping against the floor and the familiar hum of voices. She could smell the faint scent of pizza and fries. And she carefully moved toward her usual spot in the far corner, away from the busy crowd. But that day would be different. That day, the bullies had planned something crueler than usual. As Aaliyah walked past one of the long lunch tables, she heard a sudden hush of whispers, followed by giggles. She ignored it at first. She was used to people laughing whenever she passed by. But then, just as she was about to reach her corner, someone stuck out their leg. Aaliyah's cane tapped against the obstacle, but it was too late. Her foot caught on the chair, and she stumbled forward. In that split second, her tray tilted, and the food she carried, pizza, a carton of milk, and a small bowl of fruit, spilled. Across the floor, the milk burst open, splashing across her shoes, and the pizza slid across the tiles. The cafeteria erupted in laughter. The sound filled every corner of the room, sharp and cruel. Some students clapped their hands on the table while others shouted mocking comments. "Watch where you're going," one boy yelled. Another voice chimed in. "Guess she didn't see that coming." The laughter grew louder, like a wave. Crashing over her, Aaliyah froze. For a moment, she felt her cheeks burn with shame. Her hands trembled slightly as she gripped her cane. She wanted to bend down to pick up her food, but she could already hear the sound of someone sliding the tray further away, just to make her struggle. Every second of silence from her made the laughter sharper, harsher. She took a slow breath, steadying herself. She had been through small humiliations before, but this felt different. This wasn't a private whisper or a hidden prank. This was public, loud, and meant to break her. In that moment, Aaliyah felt the weight of all the cruel jokes, all the quiet bullying pressing down on her shoulders. And yet, she refused to let them see her cry. She bent down slowly, reaching toward where she thought the tray had fallen. But just as her fingers brushed the edge, someone kicked it lightly, sliding it further away. The cafeteria roared with laughter again. The sound pierced her like knives, but she stayed calm. She stretched out her hand once more, her cane resting against her arm for balance. She could hear the scrape of plastic as another foot nudged the tray again. "Come on, grab it," a girl mocked. "Oh, white, too can't." Alia's chest tightened, but she pressed her lips together, refusing to answer. She wanted to scream, to tell them she wasn't helpless, but she knew her words would only fuel their cruelty. Instead, she sat up straight, her chin raised slightly. If they wanted her to cry, they would be disappointed. Finally, a teacher's voice cut through the noise. "Enough." The room grew quieter, though giggles still lingered in the air. The teacher hurried over, picked up the tray, and handed it back to Alia. "Are you all right?" she asked gently. Alia nodded. "I'm fine," she said softly, though inside, her heart was pounding. She walked carefully to her corner table, sat down, and placed the tray in front of her. She could still hear the whispers and muffled laughter. But she focused on steadying her breath. On the outside, she appeared calm, silent, even unbothered. But inside, she was boiling. The humiliation cut deep. She had endured so much already, but this public scene felt like the final straw. She could feel the sting of tears pressing behind her eyes, but she blinked them away, refusing to let them fall as she sat there. Pushing her food around silently, a thought grew stronger in her mind. They think I am weak. They think I cannot fight back. They don't know who I am. Her sensei's words echoed in her memory. True strength is not shown in anger, but in control. Wait for the right moment, then they will see. That day, in the middle of the cafeteria, Alia promised herself something. She would not always be silent. She would not always let them humiliate her. One day, when the time was right, they would see the truth. They would see the strength she carried inside. And when that day came, the same bullies who laughed at her would remember this moment not with joy, but with shame. For now, she sat quietly, eating her lunch with dignity. The bullies thought they had won, but in reality, they had only planted the seed of their own downfall. What no one in that cafeteria knew was that Alia was not just a blind girl humiliated by her classmates. She was a fighter, a warrior in disguise. And soon, they would all learn that beneath her silence was the heart of a karate master. That night. After the humiliation in the cafeteria, Alia sat quietly in her room. The echoes of laughter from her classmates still rang in her ears. She replayed the scene again and again, feeling the sting of shame each time. But as she sat in silence, she reminded herself of a truth no one at school knew. They only saw her as a blind girl, someone fragile and weak. What they didn't know was that when the laughter faded and the halls were empty, Alia lived a very different life. When the sun set and most students turned on their phones or TVs, Alia went somewhere else, to a small, humble dojo at the edge of town. The building was plain on the outside, its wooden sign slightly worn, but to Alia, it was a sacred place. Inside, the air smelled of polished wood and faint incense, and the quiet hum of discipline lingered in every corner. Here, she wasn't the blind girl. Here, she was a student of karate. Her journey began years earlier, when her mother noticed how Alia struggled with the world around her. She was often excluded, teased, or left out of games. "You need more than just courage, my child," her mother told her one evening. "You need strength, not just for your body, but for your heart." So she introduced Alia to Sensei Hiroshi, a wise and patient martial artist who had trained students of all kinds. When Alia first stepped into the dojo, she was nervous. She wondered how a blind girl could ever hope to learn karate. But Sensei Hiroshi had simply smiled and said, "Sight is only one way of seeing. You have other ways." Those words changed everything. Training was not easy. At first, Alia struggled with balance, with memorizing movements, with trusting her body. She fell often, her knees bruised, her palms sore. But each time she fell, she stood back up. Her sensei never pitied her, never treated her as fragile. He pushed her, challenged her, and believed in her when others did not. Slowly, her other senses grew sharper. She learned to sense distance by sound, the shuffle of feet, the whisper of fabric, the intake of breath before a strike. She could feel the shift of air when someone moved, and her reflexes became lightning fast. She trained not only in punches and kicks, but in awareness, patience, and control. Years passed, and Aaliyah transformed. The same girl who was mocked at school was mastering techniques that required precision and discipline. She earned her belts one by one, each color a symbol of her growth. Each test a reminder that her blindness was not a barrier, but a source of strength. When she finally tied the black belt around her waist, she felt a surge of pride unlike anything else. She had become a master not only of karate, but of herself. Outside the dojo, no one knew. Her classmates, her bullies, even some of her teachers, none of them could imagine that the quiet girl they ignored every day had the power to take down opponents twice her size. To them, she was invisible. To her sensei, she was extraordinary. But every time she walked through those hallways, hearing the laughter and the whispers, she carried that secret inside her like a flame. She knew she could defend herself if she wanted. She knew she was not weak. That knowledge kept her strong. Even when the world tried to make her feel small. One evening, after another long day at school, she stayed behind at the dojo. The room was quiet, lit only by soft lanterns. She stood barefoot on the mat, her black belt tied firmly around her waist. As she practiced her forms, each movement flowed with grace and power. Her fists cut through the air with precision, her kicks struck with speed, her body moving in perfect rhythm. She could hear her own heartbeat, steady and calm. In those moments, she felt free. Free from the whispers, free from the cruelty, free from the image of being the blind girl. In the dojo, she was something more. She was a warrior. And yet, she never forgot the cruelty she faced at school. She never forgot the cafeteria, the spilled tray, the echoing laughter. Deep inside, she knew a day would come when she would no longer be able to stay silent. A day when her secret would no longer remain hidden. For now, though, the world outside saw only a quiet, blind girl walking with her cane. They could not imagine the strength she carried, the years of training, the discipline of a master. Could not see the fighter within, but the secret was there, waiting. And when the time came, the world would learn what Aaliyah already knew. True power is not in what others see. It is in what they can never imagine. The days after the cafeteria incident passed slowly for Aaliyah. On the outside, nothing seemed different. She still walked the same halls with her cane tapping softly in front of her. She still sat alone at the corner table during lunch, quietly eating while the chatter of classmates filled the air. To everyone else, she was still the quiet blind girl who never fought back. But inside, something had changed. The humiliation in the cafeteria had left a scar. No matter how much she tried to push it away, she could still hear the roar of laughter, the cruel voices mocking her blindness. It wasn't just another prank. It was public, it was deliberate, and it was meant to crush her spirit at night. When the house was silent, she lay awake, replaying that moment. Each time she remembered the sound of her tray hitting the floor, her fists clenched tighter. She thought of her sensei's words, "True strength is not shown in anger, but in control." She repeated those words like a mantra. Yet a part of her also whispered, "How long will you stay silent? How long will you let them treat you like this?" The more she thought, the more a quiet storm built inside her. She wasn't angry at her blindness. She wasn't angry at her life. She was angry at the way people refused to see beyond it. The bullies didn't just laugh at her, they dismissed her, erased her, treated her like she was less than human. And that was something she could no longer allow. Her breaking point came on a Wednesday afternoon. The air outside was heavy with the smell of rain, and the sky was dark, as though the world itself sensed something was about to happen. Aaliyah was walking down the hallway toward her locker when she heard the familiar voices of the bullies. Behind her, well, look who it is, one sneered. Careful, don't trip again. The others laughed. Footsteps echoed closer until she felt the presence of 3 of them circling around her. She tightened her grip on her cane. Where you headed, princess? Another mocked. Need help finding the bathroom? They didn't expect a response. They never did. Usually, Aaliyah kept her head down and ignored them. But this time, she stood still, listening. She could hear their breaths, uneven with excitement. She could hear the faint shuffle of their shoes as they closed in around her. One of them flicked her cane out of her hand, letting it clatter onto the floor. The sound echoed sharply through the hallway, followed by laughter. Oops, the bully said. Guess you don't need that, right? The laughter rang in her ears, but this time it didn't sting the way it used to. This time, something shifted. Aaliyah straightened her back and lifted her chin. Her heart was steady, her breathing calm. The years of training she had hidden for so long surged within her like a river breaking free. Pick it up yourself, she said quietly. The hallway fell silent. The bully stared at her, surprised she had spoken. For the first time, her voice carried not fear, but authority. What did you say? One of them scoffed, trying to cover his unease. Aaliyah turned her head slightly, her ears focusing on the sound of his voice. She knew exactly where he stood, how close he was, how ready he was to strike. But she was ready to pick it up. Yourself, she repeated, firmer this time. The bully laughed nervously, then shoved her shoulder. It wasn't hard, just enough to knock her off balance, or so he thought. But Aaliyah didn't stumble. She planted her feet, strong and steady, her body reacting just as her sensei had trained her. Inside, something powerful unfurled. She had endured for years. She had swallowed her pride, hidden her strength, stayed silent. But not anymore. This was the moment. This was the breaking point. Aaliyah took a slow breath, her fists curling at her sides. She wasn't going to attack recklessly. She wasn't going to let anger control her. She was going to defend herself calmly and with precision. The bullies had no idea. To them, this was just another game. They were laughing again, circling her, mocking her blindness. But their game was about to end. For the first time in her life, Aaliyah wasn't afraid of what they would do. Instead, she was focused, her senses sharp, her training guiding her every thought. She could hear the way one bully shifted his weight onto his right foot, preparing to push her. She could sense the slight movement of another leaning closer, ready to grab her bag, and in that instant, she knew this was it. The moment she had been waiting for. The moment when her silence would shatter, when the truth would come to light. She was no longer just the quiet blind girl they mocked. She was a fighter, a warrior, a master. And when she moved, the world around her would never be the same again. The hallway was tense, filled with mocking laughter on one side and an unshakable calm on the other. Aaliyah stood still, her face steady, her body rooted like a tree. The bullies thought they had cornered her, thought they were about to enjoy another cruel victory. But what they didn't realize was that this time they were standing on dangerous ground. One of them reached forward, tugging at her backpack. "What's in here, huh?" "Braille books, snacks," he jeered. The others laughed, egging him on. But Aaliyah's hand shot up instantly, quicker than anyone expected. With a firm grip, she twisted his wrist just enough to make him let go. Boy yelped in surprise, stumbling back. The hallway went silent for a beat. The bullies looked at each other, confused. That had never happened before. What was that? Another scoffed, trying to laugh off his friend's embarrassment. She just got lucky. He stepped closer, his sneakers squeaking against the floor. Aaliyah tilted her head slightly, listening. She could hear his weight shift, his breath quicken. She knew what was coming before he even made his move. When he reached out to shove her, Aaliyah moved with lightning speed. She sidestepped smoothly, her hand catching his arm, and with a simple motion, she redirected his force. He lost his balance and stumbled into a locker with a loud clang. The sound echoed down the hallway. Gasps rose from nearby students who had stopped to watch. Their eyes widened, unsure of what they had just seen. The bully's confidence began to crack. But one of them still tried to laugh. "You think you're tough. You're blind. What can you do?" He barked, stepping forward with more aggression. This time, Aaliyah's breathing was calm, her senses sharp. She could hear the faint scuff of his shoes, the rush of air as he swung his arm. At the exact moment his hand came toward her, she ducked slightly and delivered a swift, controlled palm strike to his chest. He staggered backward, his eyes wide. The wind knocked out of him. The hallway erupted not with laughter, but with shocked whispers. "Did you see that?" One student gasped. "No way. How did she?" Another whispered, unable to finish the sentence. The bullies, now shaken, were no longer laughing. Their smirks had vanished, replaced by disbelief and fear. This wasn't the helpless girl they had mocked for years. This was someone different, someone powerful. One of them, the tallest of the group, tried to regain control. "All right, enough of this," he growled. He charged toward her, anger overtaking his reason. But Aaliyah had trained for moments exactly like this. She turned slightly, her ears catching the sound of his steps, the vibration of his weight pounding the floor. Up. At the precise second he reached her, she pivoted on her heel and swept her leg in a controlled arc. His feet were taken out from under him, and he crashed to the floor with a heavy thud. Asterisk. The hallway filled with stunned silence. Students froze, their mouths open, their phones halfway raised to record what they had just witnessed. Aaliyah stood still, her hands relaxed by her sides, her face calm. She hadn't yelled, she hadn't bragged, she hadn't even looked angry. Every move she made had been controlled, precise, and exact. Years of training had come alive in that moment, and the girl they thought was weak had revealed her true strength. The bullies scrambled to their feet, their arrogance shattered. They looked at her differently, now not as a victim, not as a target, but as someone they could never humiliate again. Their pride stung worse than their bruises, and for the first time, they felt what it was like to be powerless around them. Students whispered louder, "She knows karate. She's amazing." Never knew. Aaliyah didn't speak. She simply bent down, picked up her cane from the floor, and straightened her posture. The hallway, once filled with cruel laughter, was now heavy with respect and awe. She tapped her cane once, the sound echoing like a statement. She was not someone to be underestimated. The bullies didn't dare speak again. They backed away slowly, their eyes wide, their bravado gone. The crowd of students parted to let them through, watching as the once feared tormentors slunk away in silence. For Aaliyah, the moment was more than just self-defense. It was liberation. All the years of holding back, of hiding her strength, had finally come to an end. She had stood her ground not with anger, but with honor, exactly as her sensei had taught her. Deep inside, she felt no pride in embarrassing her bullies. She didn't want revenge. What she wanted was respect, the acknowledgement that she was more than her blindness. And in that moment, she had earned it. The unexpected turn had finally arrived. Aaliyah was no longer just the quiet blind girl humiliated by others. She was a warrior whose silence had been her strength all along. And now, the whole school knew the truth. The fight was over almost as quickly as it had begun. The bullies, red-faced and shaken, melted into the crowd of students that had gathered in the hallway. Their swagger had disappeared. They no longer looked like the untouchable rulers of the school. Instead, they looked small, embarrassed, and defeated. Aaliyah stood quietly in the center of it all, her cane resting against her hand. She hadn't shouted, she hadn't gloated, she hadn't even smiled. Her calmness made the scene even more powerful. She looked composed, almost serene, as if what had just happened wasn't a dramatic fight, but something completely natural. For a long moment, the hallway was silent, except for the sound of her steady breathing. Then, slowly, whispers began to ripple through the crowd. She just took them down. I didn't know she could do that. She's incredible. Students who had never spoken to Aaliyah before now stared at her with wide eyes, not with mockery, but with awe. Phones that had been lifted to record the bullying were now capturing something very different. The rise of a girl no one had expected. One student broke the silence with a voice full of respect. "That was amazing, Aaliyah." The words were simple, but to her, they felt like something she had been waiting years to hear. She nodded slightly, her expression calm, but inside, her heart pounded. This was the moment she had dreamed of, not to humiliate anyone, but to finally be seen for who she really was. Word spread quickly. By the end of the day, nearly everyone in school had heard the story. Some exaggerated it, claiming she had flipped 3 bullies at once or knocked someone out cold. Others spoke of it with admiration, describing how graceful and strong she had looked. The details blurred, but the truth was clear. Aaliyah was no longer invisible. At lunch the next day, something remarkable happened. Instead of walking alone to her corner table, Aaliyah heard footsteps approaching from behind. The heavy, mocking ones she had grown used to, but lighter, hesitant ones. "Hey Aaliyah, can we sit with you?" a girl asked gently. Voice trembled slightly, as though she wasn't sure if she'd be welcome. Aaliyah paused, surprised. For years, she had eaten alone, her table untouched by anyone but her. She tilted her head toward the girl, listening to the sincerity in her tone. Then she nodded. "Yes," she said softly. Chairs scraped across the floor as a few students sat beside her. They asked her questions, not mocking ones, but genuine ones. "How long have you been training? Was that really karate? You were incredible yesterday." Aaliyah answered calmly, her words careful. She didn't brag, didn't exaggerate. She simply explained that she had been training for years. That karate had given her strength and discipline, and that she never wanted to use it to hurt people, only to protect herself. For the first time in a long time, the cafeteria sounded different to her. The laughter was no longer cruel, no longer directed at her. Instead, the atmosphere around her table was warm, curious, and even respectful. The bullies, meanwhile, kept their distance. They walked through the cafeteria with their heads low, avoiding her gaze. The same students who once tripped her or stole her books now made sure not to cross her path. Their silence was the greatest proof of all. They knew they had been defeated, not just physically, but in spirit. Teachers noticed the change too. One pulled Aaliyah aside and said quietly, "I always knew you had strength in you, but yesterday you showed everyone else. I'm proud of you." Those words made her chest swell with quiet pride. For Aaliyah, the most powerful change wasn't the whispers of admiration or the sudden attention from classmates. It was the feeling inside herself. For the first time, she felt seen, not pitied, not mocked, not ignored. Seen. People were beginning to recognize her for more than her blindness. They were seeing her courage, her discipline, her fire. That night, as she sat in her room, she thought about what had happened. She remembered the laughter of the bullies, the gasps of the crowd, the silence that followed when she revealed her strength, and though she felt proud, she also felt a deep sense of responsibility. Her sensei's voice echoed in her memory. Karate is not about showing off power. It is about balance, honor, and respect. She knew this new respect came with a choice. She could use it to seek revenge, to make the bullies suffer the way they had made her suffer. Or she could use it to inspire. To show others that strength doesn't come from cruelty, but from discipline and heart. She chose the latter. From that day on, Aaliyah walked the school halls a little taller. She didn't need to prove herself. Any more, her actions had spoken louder than words ever could. Students who once ignored her now greeted her by name. Some even asked her for advice or help with schoolwork. Slowly, the wall of isolation that had surrounded her for years began to crumble. The bullies had lost more than a fight. They had lost their power. And in its place, Aaliyah had gained something far more valuable: respect. The days after the hallway incident unfolded like ripples in water. What had once been a place of constant mockery for Aaliyah had slowly transformed into something new. The whispers that followed her through the hallways were no longer cruel jokes, but words of admiration. Students who had once looked away now looked at her with awe. Even teachers seemed to watch her differently, no longer with quiet pity, but with respect. But while the world around her shifted, Aaliyah herself remained calm. She never walked with her head held arrogantly high, never demanded attention or glory. She carried herself the same way she always had: steady, graceful, and dignified. The only difference now was that others finally noticed. The bullies, once the loudest voices in her life, had gone silent. They no longer shoved her in the halls or laughed when she passed. When their footsteps echoed nearby, they carried hesitation, not confidence. They avoided her gaze, their voices subdued, their laughter forced. It was clear they had learned a lesson, but whether it was fear or respect that silenced them, Aaliyah didn't care. For her, it was enough that they would think twice before hurting someone else again. But more importantly, something had changed within her classmates. They began to understand something deeper: that strength was not always visible. That true courage often lived quietly within those they overlooked. Some students even approached her to apologize for the times they had joined in the laughter or stood by without helping. Aaliyah accepted their words kindly, not with bitterness, but with a quiet grace that left them humbled. One afternoon, a teacher asked her if she would be willing to speak to a younger class about confidence and resilience. Standing in front of a group of wide-eyed children, Aaliyah told her story in simple words. She explained how she had felt invisible, how she had endured cruelty, and how she found strength not by fighting with anger, but by believing in herself and never giving up. The room fell silent as the children listened, and for the first time, Aaliyah realized that her pain had given birth to something powerful. Her story had become a lantern for others, walking in the dark, at home. She shared this realization with her mother. "I thought karate was only for protecting myself," Aaliyah admitted. "But now I see it's also about teaching others to respect themselves, to respect people they don't understand." Her mother smiled and hugged her tightly. "That is the greatest lesson of all," she whispered. Her sensei, too, recognized her growth. After practice one evening, he said, "You defended yourself with honor. But more importantly, you showed restraint. That is what separates a fighter from a true master." Aaliyah bowed deeply, her heart swelling with gratitude. She knew now that karate was not just about kicks and punches, was about spirit, patience, and dignity. As weeks turned into months, the memory of the cafeteria humiliation began to fade, replaced by the story of the girl who had stood tall against her bullies. But Aaliyah never forgot. She carried that moment in her heart, not as a wound, but as a reminder. It reminded her of the cruelty that silence can hide and of the strength that can emerge when silence is broken. The school itself seemed different. Teachers spoke more openly about bullying. Students were quicker to defend one another. And, in subtle ways, Aaliyah's courage had changed the culture of the place. It was as though her one act of standing up had unlocked something in others, the courage to be kinder, to be braver, to see beyond the surface. For Aaliyah, the greatest victory wasn't that she had defeated her bullies. The real victory was that she had proven to herself and to everyone else that her blindness did not define her. She was not weak. She was not helpless. She was not someone to be pitied. She was strong, capable, and deserving of respect. One morning, as she walked through the halls with her cane tapping gently in rhythm, she heard a small voice call out, "Hi, Aaliyah." She turned toward the sound, recognizing it as a younger student. "You're really cool," the child said shyly. Aaliyah smiled. To her, those simple words meant more than all the whispers of admiration. Oh? They meant she had inspired someone to see differently, and so the blind girl who had once been humiliated in front of the entire school became something far greater. She became a symbol, a reminder that strength is not always loud, that courage is not always visible, and that dignity can shine brighter than cruelty. Her story carried a lesson for everyone who had witnessed it. Never judge someone by what you see on the surface, because hidden within even the quietest, most underestimated person may be the spirit of a fighter, a survivor, and a master. For the bullies, the lesson was clear. Their cruelty had not broken her, it had revealed her. Their laughter had not destroyed her, it had awakened her. And for the rest of the school, the message would remain long after the whispers faded. True respect is earned not by fear, but by the strength of character, the power of resilience, and the courage to rise. Above and Aaliyah, the quiet blind girl they once mocked, would never again walk the halls unseen.